The great station clock clanged 6 times, a sound Elias knew well. He stood by the sorting table, his hands moving with practiced ease. Each letter, each parcel, found its rightful place in the sturdy leather mailbag. The air hummed with the energy of the morning train. Steam hissed from mighty engines, smelling of hot metal and coal. Conductors shouted final calls, their voices echoing off the high, arched ceiling. Elias was a quiet man, but his eyes missed nothing. He saw the hurried goodbyes, the sleepy travelers, and the station master's stern face. His job was simple: deliver the mail. Yet in every sealed envelope, he felt a flicker of the stories they held. He ran a thumb over a crisp, new stamp, admiring its tiny, perfect lines. He noted the precise wax seal on a legal document, imagining the serious words hidden within. His movements were smooth, almost like a dance. He tucked a small, rectangular package deep into a pocket, then neatly stacked a pile of newspapers. The mailbag grew heavy, a good weight, a sign of a day's work ahead. He checked his pocket watch, its tick-tock a steady beat against the station's roar. 6:15. Time to board. He slung the mailbag over his shoulder, the leather creaking softly, a familiar sound of duty. Just as Elias turned to step onto the platform, a harried station clerk rushed up, thrusting a single, thick envelope into his hand. Special delivery, Elias. Most urgent. Hand-to-hand only. The clerk's eyes darted around nervously before he scurried back into the station office. Elias frowned. This wasn't part of his usual routine. The letter felt strangely heavy, much more so than its size suggested. It was made of thick, yellowed parchment, not the usual crisp white paper. And instead of one seal, it had 3, pressed deep into the wax with a symbol Elias didn't recognize: a broken chain. A faint, dusty smell rose from it, like old books mixed with something else, something sharp and almost sad. It smelled a little like desperation. Elias turned the letter over in his hand, feeling its unusual texture. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, just marked for delivery to the right hands. His curiosity, usually a quiet hum, now buzzed like a trapped fly. This was no ordinary correspondence. It felt important, perhaps even dangerous. He carefully slid it into a separate, inner pocket of his mailbag, away from the other letters, its unusual weight a constant presence against his side. The train whistle blew its final, piercing call. Elias stepped aboard, the mysterious letter a silent companion. The train rattled westward, leaving the bustling city behind. Elias watched the landscape change from green fields to dry, dusty plains. The sun beat down, turning the sky a pale, washed-out blue. Hours passed, marked by the steady clickety-clack of the wheels on the tracks. He felt the mysterious letter heavy in his bag, a constant, quiet hum of curiosity. Finally, the train slowed, its whistle blowing a mournful sound. Elias peered out the window. This was Blackwood, a town he'd heard whispers about, mostly bad. The station was a sorry sight. Paint peeled from the wooden walls, and the roof sagged. The station clock was stuck, its hands frozen at 2:15, though it was now nearly evening. Dust devils danced across the empty platform. When he stepped off, a wave of quiet sadness seemed to hang in the air. The few people waiting on the platform looked tired, their shoulders slumped. Their clothes were drab, and their faces held a deep-set worry that Elias found unsettling. No children played, no laughter drifted from nearby houses. Even the air felt heavy, as if the town itself was holding its breath. This was not a place of vibrant life. It was a place where hope seemed to have packed its bags and left. Elias tightened his grip on his mailbag, suddenly feeling the weight of the town's sorrow as much as the letter within. Elias consulted a small, folded map he'd found tucked inside his uniform pocket, part of the special delivery instructions. It led him down a narrow, dusty street, past boarded-up shops and silent houses, until he reached a small, unassuming bakery. A faded sign above the door read "Sweet Treats," but the windows were grimy, and no pleasant smell of baking bread drifted out. Still, the map showed this was the place. He pushed open the creaky door. A bell above it gave a weak jingle. Inside, the shop was dim and empty, save for a few stale loaves on a shelf. A woman with flour-dusted hands appeared from a back room, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. She looked like the town itself, worn down but not entirely broken. "Are you Elias, the courier?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, pulling the heavy, sealed letter from his inner pocket. "Special delivery. For the right hands." Her hand trembled as she took it, her fingers tracing the broken chain symbol on the wax. She tore open the seals with urgency, her eyes scanning the contents. As she read, her face changed. First, a flicker of disbelief, then a tremor of shock, and finally, a single tear tracked a path through the flour on her cheek. It was a tear of profound relief, mixed with a bitter anger. Elias watched, understanding that whatever this letter contained, it was more than just words on a page. It was a key to something deeply buried. The baker, her name was Martha, looked up from the letter, her eyes still brimming. "It's from my sister, Ilera," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "She wrote this from the jail weeks ago and somehow got it to the outside. This is proof." Elias leaned closer, his curiosity fully engaged. "Proof of what?" Martha wiped her tears with a floury hand. "Proof that Judge Thorne lied. He framed Ilera, said she stole from him, but it was him who stole from her. Her land, her inheritance, everything. He put her in jail to get it." Her voice grew stronger with each word, a fiery anger replacing the sadness. "This letter, it tells where the real papers are, the ones that show she owns the land, and how Thorne forged documents." Elias's mind raced. He remembered the broken chain symbol on the wax seal, a symbol of being trapped and now, perhaps, of being set free. The judge, Thorne, was a name he'd heard whispered in the city too, never with anything good. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the weight of what he held. Not just a letter, but the key to righting a terrible wrong. This wasn't just a delivery anymore. It was a mission. The silent, sad town suddenly made sense. They were living under the shadow of a corrupt man. And now, Elias had a chance to shine a light. Elias looked at Martha, then at the letter. He wasn't a hero. He was a postal courier, a man of routine, of schedules and stamps. But the injustice burned within him. He thought of Ilera, locked away, and of the judge, sitting comfortably in his ill-gotten gains. The sadness in Blackwood made perfect sense now. It was the weight of a town suffering under a bully. "We can't let this stand," Elias said, his voice firm, surprising even himself. "This letter is powerful, but it's just one voice. We need more." Martha looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. "But how? Thorne controls everything here." Elias tapped his mailbag. "He might control the courts, but he doesn't control the mail. Not really. The Postal Service reaches everywhere. It connects people, carries messages, carries truth. I know its ways. I know its rules. And I know how to make it work for us." He began to pace the small bakery, a plan already forming in his mind. "We'll use every stamp, every wax seal, every postmark. We'll turn the very system meant for order into a force for justice. We'll make sure no one can ignore Ilera's story." He was no fighter, but he knew the power of a well-sent letter, of 1,000 well-sent letters. He would use his quiet knowledge, his careful methods, to make a loud noise. The next morning, the bakery transformed. Elias, with Martha's help, set up a makeshift postal station on a long, flour-dusted table. He explained his plan to the trickle of curious townsfolk who dared to enter. "We need your voices," he said, holding up a blank sheet of paper. "Write what you know, what you've seen, how Judge Thorne has hurt this town. Write to the city authorities, to the newspapers, to anyone who will listen." He carefully showed them how to fold the paper, how to put it in an envelope, and, most importantly, how to address it clearly. "Every letter needs a stamp," he stressed, demonstrating the proper placement in the upper right corner. "And write your name, even if it's just your first name, so they know these are real people." Some of the townsfolk hesitated, their fear of Thorn still strong. But as Elias spoke of Alara's unjust imprisonment, and as Martha shared her sister's plight, a quiet determination began to spread. Old Man Hemlock, who had barely spoken a word in years, carefully began to scratch out a letter about Thorn's unfair taxes. Mrs. Gable, whose family farm had been threatened, wrote of her struggle. Elias moved among them, a patient teacher, checking addresses, making sure the stamps were straight. He explained the journey each letter would take, the train, the sorting rooms, the hands that would touch it. This wasn't just writing, it was sending a message, a plea, a demand for justice. The silence of Blackwood was slowly being filled, not with shouts, but with the quiet scratching of pens. The local letters were a good start, but Elias knew they needed more. Judge Thorn's corruption wasn't limited to Blackwood. He had heard whispers from other towns along the rail line, stories of crooked dealings and unfair rulings. This was where his true network came into play. During his next train journey, Elias didn't just deliver mail. He delivered urgent messages of a different kind. At each stop, he sought out fellow postal workers, station masters, and even the train conductors he'd known for years. He spoke in hushed tones, explaining Alara's plight and Judge Thorn's reach. He asked them to spread the word quietly, to find anyone in their towns who had been wronged by Thorn, anyone with a story to tell. Tell them to write it down, Elias instructed, and to send it to Martha at the bakery in Blackwood. Make sure they know it's safe. Use a sturdy envelope and mark it private for Martha. We need their testimonies, their proof, sent through the mail. He provided specific instructions for addressing, reminding them of the importance of clear handwriting and proper postage. The railway, usually a silent conveyor of goods and letters, now carried a hidden current of rebellion, a web of whispered pleas for justice extending far beyond Blackwood's dusty borders. Elias felt a quiet satisfaction knowing his trusted network was now working for something truly important. Soon, the trickle of letters became a steady stream, then a flood. Every train that pulled into Blackwood's dilapidated station seemed to carry more mail than before, all of it destined for the bakery. Elias, on his regular route, would arrive to find Martha, no longer sad, but beaming, surrounded by stacks of envelopes. They came from Blackwood, from Meadowbrook, from Oakhaven, from every town touched by Thorn's dark influence. Letters of support for Alara piled up, next to petitions demanding justice. Witness accounts, sealed with their own unique marks, detailed Thorn's misdeeds, forged deeds, rigged trials, threats, and bribes. The postal system, a quiet, orderly machine, had become a buzzing network of defiance. Each envelope, carefully stamped and addressed, was a tiny act of courage. Judge Thorn's office, usually a quiet place of dusty ledgers, began to be swamped. Messengers from the city, sent to investigate the sudden surge of correspondence, arrived with grim faces. Clerks struggled to sort through the sheer volume of mail, each letter echoing the same story: Thorn's corruption. The judge, who had relied on silence and fear, found himself buried under an avalanche of truth, delivered one carefully stamped letter at a time. The quiet postal system had found its voice, and it was roaring. Each day, after delivering his regular mail, Elias would return to the bakery. He would pull up a chair next to Martha, and together they would sort through the latest batch of arrivals. Elias handled each letter with the reverence of a scholar studying ancient texts. He noted the precise postmark, tracing the journey of each envelope across the country. This one came from Willow Creek, he'd say, pointing to a faint circle of ink. Old Man Peterson must have sent it. He had dealings with Thorn over those timber rights. He'd examine the wax seals, admiring the care taken by senders to protect their words. Some were simple thumbprints, others bore crests or initials, each a unique signature of courage. Elias meticulously organized them, separating petitions from personal testimonies and witness accounts from pleas for help. The stack grew taller and wider, a silent testament to Thorn's widespread tyranny. Elias felt a quiet, deep pride as the pile grew. This wasn't just mail, it was evidence. Each letter was a thread in a tapestry of truth, woven together by the very postal system he served. The precise, bureaucratic details he loved, the stamps, the postmarks, the careful addressing, were no longer just about delivery. They were about building a case, piece by careful piece, until it was impossible to ignore. He saw not just paper and ink, but the faces of the people who wrote them, their hopes and their brave defiance contained within each folded sheet. The sheer, undeniable volume of mail could not be ignored. City officials, initially dismissive, found their desks buried under a mountain of letters, each one a complaint, a testimony, a plea against Judge Thorne. The Postmaster General himself, a man who prided himself on the efficiency of his service, demanded answers for the unprecedented influx of mail from Blackwood and its surrounding districts. A formal inquiry was launched. A team of stern-faced investigators arrived in Blackwood, their presence a stark contrast to the town's usual quiet despair. They expected to find a few disgruntled citizens, perhaps a small protest. Instead, they found Elias and Martha in the bakery, standing proudly before towering stacks of meticulously organized letters. Elias, usually so reserved, spoke with quiet authority. He presented the original letter from Alara, its broken chain seal a powerful symbol. Then, with Martha's help, he laid out the hundreds of other letters. He explained the postmarks, showing how the complaints spanned across the region. He pointed to the wax seals, each one a unique mark of someone wronged. The investigators, accustomed to dry legal documents, were faced with a living, breathing testament to injustice. The weight of the evidence, measured not in pounds but in human suffering and shared courage, was simply too great to dismiss. Alara's case, long sealed shut by Thorne, was forced wide open. The day Alara was freed, the station clock in Blackwood, which had been stuck for so long, seemed to chime. It was a silent chime, felt more than heard, a chime of hope. Judge Thorne, stripped of his power and facing a mountain of evidence, was arrested. The news spread through Blackwood like wildfire, bringing smiles to faces that had forgotten how to truly light up. Elias stood with Martha as Alara, thin but with a newfound strength in her eyes, stepped out of the courthouse. The townspeople, once fearful, now cheered. Her first embrace was for her sister, Martha, a long, tearful hug. Then, Alara turned to Elias, her gaze full of gratitude. "Thank you, courier," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You delivered more than just a letter. You delivered justice." Not only was Alara free, but her land, the very reason for Thorne's treachery, was legally returned to her. The formal documents, bearing fresh wax seals and official stamps, arrived by the very postal service Elias championed. It was a victory not just for one woman, but for the idea that even the smallest, quietest actions, when multiplied and coordinated, could bring down a seemingly unshakable power. The systematic, humble process of sending letters had proven mightier than the corrupt judge. Life in Blackwood slowly began to bloom again. Children played in the streets, laughter returned, and the station clock was finally fixed, its hands now moving with cheerful purpose. Elias continued his postal rounds, his uniform neat, his mailbag heavy with ordinary letters. But now, his steps were lighter, his gaze more open. He was still Elias, the quiet courier, but the town saw him differently. When he delivered a parcel, people would offer him a cup of coffee or a slice of Martha's freshly baked bread. Old Man Hemlock would nod to him with a newfound respect, and Mrs. Gable would smile warmly. They knew what he had done, how he had used the very tools of his quiet trade to achieve something remarkable. He hadn't fought with fists or shouted from a stage. He had fought with postmarks and wax seals, with the diligent, precise power of communication. Elias carried a new sense of purpose in his work. Every letter, every package, now felt like more than just a delivery. It was a connection, a possibility, a whisper of the power that ordinary people could wield when they spoke together. The Postal Service, once just a job, was now a symbol of truth and community. And Elias, the quiet hero, was its humble, vital heart. He continued to watch, to listen, always ready to ensure the right message reached the right hands. On his next journey, the train rattled eastward, taking Elias away from Blackwood. He sat by the window, his mailbag resting securely beside him, no longer just a burden of letters, but a symbol of what could be achieved. The landscape outside blurred past, green fields returning, stretching under a clear, bright sky. The station clock in his mind, once frozen in despair, now ticked forward with the rhythm of progress. Elias watched the towns and farms rush by, each one a collection of homes, of lives, of stories waiting to be told. He thought of Alara, now free, tending her land, and of Martha, baking bread with a smile. He thought of the hundreds of letters, each one a tiny piece of paper, a few words, a simple stamp, a careful wax seal. Yet together, those small things had moved mountains. He, Elias, the quiet courier, had merely connected the dots, ensuring each message reached its destination. He was a small cog in a vast machine, but he had helped that machine turn towards justice. A faint smile touched his lips. He knew, with a certainty deeper than any postmark, that even the simplest letter, faithfully delivered, held the power to change a life, to right a wrong, to make the world a little brighter. And that was a truth he would carry with him on every journey for all his days.